This year's 50th anniversary Peninsula Run is over 1,100 miles long, starting in Ensenada and ending in La Paz.
The Baja 1000 is the longest point-to-point race in the world. Probably the most grueling day of racing you can get yourself involved in. Incredibly rough, but incredibly beautiful. You get to see a Cortez, the Pacific Ocean, and everything Baja has to offer, including epic fans cheering you all the way down the peninsula.
So this is No Brakes, my presentation. As you can probably deduce, it's about off-road racing, but in more specific, it is the Baja 1000, which is an annual Mexican off-road motorsport race held on the Baja California Peninsula. It's one of the most prestigious off-road races, having attracted competitors from around the world. There are no qualifications to enter. There's just an entry fee. It takes place in mid-November. Last year, I believe, it was the 15th through the 20th, and it's roughly a 1,000-mile endurance race that finds the breaking point of the drivers and their machines. It's also about whether you can survive getting jostled around for 20 hours covered in mud, sand, and dust, and of course, there's no stopping for bathroom breaks. The reason it's so impressive to win or even finish is because the cumulative finishing rate is about 50%. The bikers usually start first, many hours ahead of the trucks, and then the trucks begin with minute intervals separating them. Then it's an all-out race to the finish, and since the races are so long, there's definitely no avoiding nighttime. At night, in the desert, there's no ambient light. The driver's headlights are their only separation from the pitch black, and extra care must be taken to avoid obstacles, traps, and collisions with slower-moving vehicles. It's not unheard to get lost along the course during the day, and even more so at night when visibility becomes a bigger issue. If you can make it through the terrain around the herds of cattle and cacti forest without breaking down, you might be able to finish. In 2020, 185 teams began the race and 111 finished, which is about 60%. Locals also set up booby traps, which can be stumps or logs covered in sand. It could also be like digging holes in order to watch the trucks break apart or launch into the air, and it is probably out of spite or just for fun. How did it all start? Didn't really start as a race. In 1962, two motorcyclists timed how long it took them to ride from Tijuana to La Paz, which is roughly 950 miles, and they did it in just under 4 hours. And then on November 1st, 1967, the first Baja 1000 race was held, and it was won by a dune buggy with a time of 27 and a half hours. The course for the Baja 1000 changes every year. This year, it was a point-to-point race starting in Ensenada. It's also started in other places and ending in La Paz. Last year, the race was run in a loop, so it started and stopped in the same place. The Mexican government took control in 1973 of this race, but quickly found out it was much more than they bargained for. And Mickey Thompson, you might recognize that last name. It's a famous tire company. He was a Baja racer and world land speed record holder, and he formed the Southern California Off-Road Enterprise, also known as SCORE, to promote these off-road races. And in 1974, the Mexican government granted exclusive rights to them to hold the races, and so they resumed in 1975. The different types of vehicles, there's a multitude of different vehicles. There's dirt bikes, trucks, truggies, which are like trucks, but a little bit less trucky, side-by-sides, Baja bugs, buggies, all that good stuff. And they all compete on the same exact course. The flora and fauna, this peninsula has a super diverse topography due to its forming by tectonic plates. It's surrounded by beaches, forests, deserts, and tall peaks are found. Many different kinds of dry scrub and smaller shrubs are dominant vegetation of this area. Ragweed, redstem, storkbill, milkfish, and several other species of cacti. There are tons of reptiles, iguanas, geckos, other lizard species, not to mention smaller rodent and bird populations. And on the larger side of things, we see coyotes, deer, bighorn sheep, and mountain lions. There's a ton of endemism in this region, which is why it's so crucial to keep it protected the best we can, or at least mitigate our effects there. All right, so getting into the environmental impacts, there's deforestation of shrubs as well as ecosystem fragmentation because tons of vehicles driving to get there, and during the race create clear lines and roads, animals get run over, the terrain is eroded, and garbage and machinery is left around by the racers and spectators, which has effects on the soil, groundwater table, flora, and fauna. Obviously, there's also emissions. Trucks can range from holding around 80 gallons to upwards of 100 gallons, and they use gas at a rate of about 2.5 miles per gallon. So with rough estimations, we're basically saying that trucks use around 400 to 500 gallons a race. So adding up all the different vehicles, racers and spectators, the emissions and gas usage may seem like a large amount, especially when you include multiple helicopters that run during the daylight hours to record it. But this is really relatively small compared to cargo ships and other big racing events such as NASCAR. I think the biggest 15 ships in the world create as much pollution as all the cars. So although not great, emissions really isn't our biggest problem, but the littering definitely is. There's no one there to collect debris. even though it is in the team's best interest to collect and salvage their machinery. So going more into that, when you're driving really fast, there's a good chance you're not going to stay on course. People, plants, animals are likely to be hit and run over. And there have even been cases of ranchers leading their animals onto the course to be hit so they can get monetary compensation, which is horrible. And also, there really hasn't been enough specific research on this area, but there are clearly people who dislike it. And it is also certain that towns and cities along the way are economically affected. So these tourists, they buy up all the resources like food, water, and gas. And that seems really good at first because you get all this monetary surplus. But then when the supply truck doesn't come to your little town for another week, you don't have water, you're not really in the best position. So what should be done? I'm not sure that it really needs to be shut down, as it isn't nearly as bad for the environment as other big races, but there certainly needs to be more done. So some of the things they've done, they've opened up an electric class, but it's really hard to say if that's actually making any difference. People aren't exactly there for that. They're there to hear loud engines. So SCORE, the racing body, needs to take on much more responsibility about the littering. They need to hold spectators accountable for their own trash and waste. They also need to hold the teams accountable. They should also do more in promoting environmental harm, or they should do more in promoting the environmental harm that they're causing and how they will amend certain aspects of it after the race. So this could be things like replanting native species or funding groups to go collect trash and perform research. And now moving on to the exhibit. All right, so first look at the museum, just a general overview. So right here in the middle, we have all the trucks and their design. There'd be a bunch of information on the specifics of that. You get a little natural habitat. This will be part of the interactive area over here. We got some of we got the liquid showcase, talking about all the liquids and fluids in the truck. All about that, what the effects are. Now we're in the theater over here. There'd be a big documentary, way more depth about all the specifics. Over here is your interactive station. Got some soil augers, and there'd be soil here. You could do some excavation, that sort of thing. Then in this corner, we got the flora and fauna, all the endemic and non-endemic species. And then we just passed over it, the multimedia area. So this would be more of interviews, both locals and the racers, talking about their experience and perspectives on it, what they think. And then over here we got failure corner, which is the most, or the parts that break the most, and all of their good effects on the environment. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Shout out Tinkercad, great 3D modeling program.